Greetings, welcome to Commerce Radio Worldwide, the mind, the journey, the destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. This is the digital online streaming mastery show that takes place on Tuesdays this time, and it is focusing on developing from the do's and don'ts of digital online streaming platforms. Probably you are already by now aware that we're talking about virtual streaming audios and videos. We see this as an industry that is growing very, very fast, and it's an industry that promises to give many opportunities to those who are the owners of content. We are looking at unit number 36, conduct 31, titled Communication Strategies and Representing the Audience as a Host and Anchor of a Show. That's the main objective of anyone who wants to see themselves on the other side of the streaming. In other words, the side of hosting, anchoring, and directing the conversation with the subject matter experts sitting on the other side, and of course, the beneficiaries of such conversation being the listeners themselves. Last week we spoke on unit number 35, conduct 30, which was about the news and media mastery. If you look at the two units, you can see that there's a follow-up and follow-through to last week's conversation. Yes, the shows are based on the principle we call the idea. We inform, entertain, develop, and educate, empower, and support, associate, and network. That's the idea. I hope we live up to those, as always, those elements of the principle. We want to be in a relaxed mode, but really generating knowledge that is benefiting us as we move ahead. We are very close to Unit 40, which is the target. Up to so far, we have been doing quite very well. This unit, it's about learning to represent your listeners, as I said, effectively using some of these communication strategies, most of which are known to us. Is really a reminder kind of a unit. We have covered so many of these topics since we started with Unit 1. For the better part of every day's life, we are communicating to or with others, whether you are delivering a speech in a boardroom, the level of attention you give to your spouses, your friends, and interesting enough, here we are saying even just the way you respond to your domestic pets, they will read in between the lines whether you are in good mood or not. So the communication strategies conversation will help many of us here today to understand the different methods of communication and how to make the most of them. These strategies will provide an excellent benefit for any organization and employees. They will trickle down through the organization and positively impact everyone involved. The conversation objectives we want to address tonight is identifying the ways of communicating, the barriers to communication and how to overcome them, develop nonverbal and paraverbal communication skills, listen actively and effectively, and ask good questions. And lastly, using the appreciative inquiry as one of the tools of communication that we can use to develop our communication competency and expertise. I'm not alone as always. I'm joined by our resident co-hosts and anchors. At the moment, I can see in our virtual studio that I have Rapula Mulivani and Divesh Motilal. On the public platform, I can see Makulube Franz Ramuta. I hope you are able to move over to this side and give you the opportunity to greet the listeners, reflect on last week's module, and of course, share with us your anticipation of today's topic. Let me invite my colleagues. Divesh, welcome to you.
Good day to you, Sam. Good day, Rapula, and a very good evening to the listeners. My name is Divesh Motilal, resident teacher at Kometsa and a avid AI enthusiast, qualified engineer by trade. And just a quick reflection on last week's show. Yes, we looked at the aspect of marketing and using media to not only plan your shows, but also to brand it and also to get feedback in terms of how your shows were progressing. Today, as Sam had said, we are looking at communication strategies, and as much as it interlinks with other modules which we've covered, it is, as we have done so in the past, Kometsa's modules can actually stand on their own and add some value to our listeners just by a virtue of having an interest in a specific module. But the modules also interlink with each other to give you a bigger picture. And as they usually say, the sum of the parts can be bigger than the whole. And likewise, with our modules in the digital online streaming mastery program, if you go through all the modules, you will definitely come out all the wiser at the end of that. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Divesh. And indeed, people can go to our podcast and they can listen to the previous modules to make a complete picture. Thank you very much, Divesh. And Rapula, over to you.
Good evening, listeners. Good evening, Sam. Good evening, Divesh. Yes, do you know my last week, if I recall well, last week I said network is an industry. You need to go and tap it because that's how you expand your business in that space. So, but beyond that, when I look at today's session in terms of communication, I said, hey, I'm going to learn a lot today. Sometimes I do it unaware, but I'm going to resuscitate my communication skills and I blind spots where in terms of communication and mixing. Because more like reminding myself what we did in the past, what's going to happen going forward. Thank you, Sam, and thank you to listeners.
Indeed. What will you say is a value proposition of investing time in mastering communication as an art, Rapula?
I think what is critical to that is having emotional intelligence in terms of our communication, because very often in the communication atmosphere, it depends how you convey your message and how's the message being received. Further than that, the atmosphere in terms of how you communicate plays a critical role. So hence communication is very, very important. In many instances, we create unaware of we have communicated the right message only to find that the person you were communicating with was not a one concentrating or even listening to you. He just nod or she just nod because he had to. But critical to that, you must make sure that you communicate, understanding a key to the communication aspect.
Mm. Mm. Why is it important? What is the objective of communication?
Objective of
in general?
objectives is to be honest, in sync. So why do we say in sync is whoever you are talking to, you must be in the same level of message. If you're not the same level of message, you're gonna lose one another.
Yeah, I like that. It is about sending message or messages to each other. I think let's sit there, Divesh, because I don't think we are conscious of what we do every day as we voice out things. The message is we always lose that fact that when you open your mouth or you use your body language, the intention consciously or unconsciously, I don't know whether that's practical, is to send a message to somebody else for various reasons. Let's take that and maybe define what is communication. I know everybody understands this word communication, but let's look at it as something that we need to be intentional about, and how will we define it to a point that it helps us to be consciously involved in the action process of communicating. Because hosting the show is one way of communicating content to the listeners, but it could be for any other purpose. So how will we define it? I don't want us to go to a textbook definition. Otherwise, we will bore our listeners.
Just before we touch on the definition of what is communication, Sam, I just wanted to touch on the point you had raised with Rapula.
Yeah.
When we talk about what is the outcome of communication, I would say that we would want to maybe build trust with regards to using effective communication. We want to resolve some kind of a problem or prevent those problems by using communication once again. We want to give direction or provide clarity in terms of certain aspect. We want to build relationships. And then, of course, we want to improve engagement as well as productivity. Those are certain areas that we would want to effect by the use of having good communication. So, in terms of a definition for me, I think it also adds from those outcomes. A definition of communication could be something that's either verbal or even non-verbal, because you could have some kind of spoken communication, written communication, and of course, the non-verbal ones would be gestures, the use of tone in the way that you communicate with a person or a group of people. So communication would be, for me, a mechanism where you use a specific channel. So that could be the verbal, non-verbal, to translate your message, your idea to another person, to try and explain what you're thinking, what you're trying to do, what you want to express to another person. That's what I would think is a kind of definition for communication, Sam.
And a channel in this case, it will be this platform, right?
Indeed, in specific terms, with regards to the digital online streaming, our communication channel would be firstly the podcasting mechanism, the live stream that people are listening to. That's our channel. And then on a different level, the channel would also be Kometsa Radio itself. So the
Yeah.
mechanism that we are using is that of a podcast through our voice and our interactions with each other. So we've got a voice mechanism, a channel where we talk to each other and we have some kind of feedback between each other, so that our listeners can pick up on the ideas and the
Yeah.
sentiments that we are trying to communicate, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah. So we are sending in this case, we are sending the kind of a message that we are sending through this channel to the recipients, being the listeners. In this case, is knowledge.
Yes, indeed. Our ideas, our knowledge, the do's and don'ts, which we've been almost professing to our listeners and guiding them along this journey of digital online streaming and mastery, Sam.
Mm, mm. Now, I'm very interested to hear from you. What do you think is the tactics that we have used to be able to, other than the chat box, how do we check if the message has landed, Rapula, with our listeners? What give us, and I'm coming to the gist of this particular topic tonight. How have you been making sure that the message and the content, the knowledge was landing the way you wanted it to land with the listeners without them talking back to you on a platform like this?
It's a pity I couldn't immediately say this, listeners, but the feedback I've received thus so far is an increasing number of listeners in our podcast indicate to us that we are reaching the right target market. We are driving the right communication. We are driving the right message. We are transforming the right message to the listeners. Indicating what are we bringing on the table, and then bring on the table the listeners, increase of number of listeners, even on a podcast, indicate to us we are conveying and transmitting appropriate message to the listener.
Yeah. Indeed, that's one way of knowing that we are meeting their needs. And we're going to come back to how do we hope to represent the audiences out there as the people hosting this show. But before we do that, let me welcome our brother, George. Welcome, George. You are in time to be part of these introductory remarks. But let me give you the opportunity to greet the listeners, give us a little bit of reflection on last week's media mastery conversation, and then, of course, your anticipations from this session of today. Over to you. George, you might be muted.
Oh, all right. Thank you, Sam. Good evening to our listeners. Thank you very much for joining us again. And as I always say every week, we don't take that for granted. So thank you. And hopefully we are doing something right. Today is special. We're talking communication, and communication cuts right across in your own communication within your own ecosystem, and communication for purposes of business. And it's, I think, one of the most important subjects in the work that we do. Last week we were very interesting conversation, but I think for me, again, it's the same thing about your participation, and I would like to skip and focus a little bit more on just the communication today. So I don't take too much of your time. I was involved in a webinar which I've just hopped out of. So I want to get myself nice and warmed up for the presentation tonight.
Beautiful. Thanks, George. I don't know whether you were already here when Divesh was giving us a broad value proposition for mastering communication or using communication, being, among others, we communicate because there are some problems that we need to resolve. We want to provide clarity. We want to build relationships, improve engagement, and improve on productivity. I thought those were quite very powerful rationales for why we are in communication, especially in business, George.
Yes, well, I think fundamentally, as we all know, communication is exchanging information, exchanging ideas, thoughts, and something normally overlooked. Communication is also exchanging feelings, right, between individuals and groups, and it's the feelings part which, as I said, tends to get overlooked, but which gets us into serious trouble. Because we might exchange beautiful ideas and thoughts, but if we overlook the emotional side, the feelings, then that might actually lead to people shutting down and not even listening to our beautiful ideas. And so it's communication is diverse, but extremely something that we have to be very sensitive to. And I think we will share as we go along.
Yeah. Today, we want to create the awareness and consciousness of how important it is in relationship between people and among groups. But at the same time, we are also saying that it is also a science that can be learned. Some people go as far as specializing on it. Organization will hire people who have studied communication as advisors and guiding the organizations. But at the basic level, that consciousness and awareness that when you are wanting to engage and relate very well with each other, these signs, these elements of communication are to be there. As Rapula was saying, that you meant to send a message to another person. And the only way to know that that message is landing very well is when you get feedback that is positive. In this case, he gave us an example of the increasing number of listeners. But instantaneously, it could also be people responding and answering in a way that actually satisfy you that your message has arrived. Therefore, communication then has taken place.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there are 5 components, right, to communication. There's the center, that is the person who's sending out the message. And then there's the message itself, the information, the content. And then the channel that we are using. What are we using? Speech, text, email, whatever it is. Then there's a receiver, the person or the group of people receiving and interpreting this thing. And then there's feedback, which is the response or reaction of the receiver to the message. And so each of those 5 stages needs to happen right for you to have effective communication.
So if one of the two is not attended to, it can bring disconnect between the sender and the receiver of the message. Because the fact that they've heard the words you said doesn't really mean that they've understood your message, George.
Absolutely. And so for effective communication, the receiver must interpret the message and understand it in line with the sender's intention. So when I send a message to you, and the receiver receives it in exactly the same, with exactly the same meaning, and he gives me back, then we have effective communication. But what happens all too often, and same you in corporate, so you would know how that works. Messages are sent, and the intention of the message and the understanding of the receiver are miles apart.
Yeah.
That's
and,
where
and often we don't know where did we go wrong. Maybe we used the wrong channel.
Right. Or maybe by the time it got there, it didn't land the way it set out to. Remember the exercise that you do in workshops? You say, tell one guy to say, tell the next guy the same message. By the time it gets to person number 10, the message is usually different. I don't know how many of we've done that exercise in workshops. You know, you give someone a message and you say, okay, send it. And by the time it is number 10, it's different. And so that is an example of how we need to pay attention to communication.
So Divesh, I know I had wanted you to thanks, George. We'll come back to those aspects when we talk about the barriers of communication. But I wanted us just to close on this definition of communication using the 3 key ways: verbal, nonverbal, and written communication. We have a choice to use any of those, but do we master all those, especially the nonverbal one? What is the trick there?
Well, the non-obvious, yes, indeed, Sam, there should be some level of mastery if you want to get into the game of online streaming and you want to be serious about it and want your listeners to get the best quality. You really got to hone in on your skills in terms of being able to communicate eloquently and clearly so that your audience understands you, and your use of tone to be able to get across different cultural barriers that you might actually encompass because of the area in which you operate online. There's different cultures, there's different race groups, your listenership could be so diverse, and you got to cater for everyone in terms of understanding the right message, as George has put it. What message you sending, you have to make sure that they receive the same understanding and not construe it in a different way. The aspect of the non-verbal, especially in terms of a situation like podcasting, your tone, the type of words that you use within a specific environment has to resonate with your listeners and has to be understood the same way you intend them to understand it. It's a little bit more dynamic again if we have something like a video stream messaging channel that we use. Again, they'll look at your facial gestures, they look at your hand gestures, again tone and how you select your words and how you pronounce those words can all convey a different communication, even if it's the same word that you use. But the way you deliver that through the communication mechanisms that you have can relay a different message to your listeners. It's something that you can practice. It's skills that you can acquire, but to really hone it in, you gotta give it more practice and more practice.
Mm. Especially if you want to reach that mastery level and the professional level, practice is the way to go. I mean, we are talking right now about communication. As we are talking about it, we are all communicating. And I'm sure the listeners have an idea of our level of comfort with this platform and this communication we are going through. And yet, at the back of our mind, there is certain areas that we know that we can still do better, Rabula.
Practice makes perfect, and talent is not enough unless you practice it. So communication is also similar basket. It doesn't matter whether it's verbal, non-verbal. The truth of the matter is communication. You practice and you practice and you practice. Once the practice is in place, then you understand that what you convey, the receiver has read the conveyed message. So that's more critical. Very often, one of the fundamental thing is somebody can be perfect in a speech message, but be bad on a text message. Because what happens, you talk faster than you type, and you tend to forget to go back and review what you've typed in. So very often, what the receiver has received what you've written and responded to what you've written is critical in terms of communication.
Yeah, you hear people say, I will prepare the slides or write the speech, and you, Rapula, must go and deliver because you are good. And if you actually can sit down and ask, what do you mean? They're actually talking about maybe you master the spoken word because you are very much able to vary your tonation and your voice, control your voice, and all that. It really, sometimes we don't tell people what it is that makes them to be well spoken, or we ourselves don't know what makes us to be well spoken because we are not intentional about that. But once you are aware of it, it can be practiced, it can be learned. And if you are able to master spoken, nonverbal, and written, then and apply that interchangeably, and we almost can say you have reached that level of mastery.
Sam, you mentioned that level of mastery. I'm just taking myself as a typical example. When I grew up, I don't want to call myself an introvert, but I was shy. I couldn't be in a position to stand in front of people and speak. But I don't know where was 360 happens. It reverted back perhaps in my high school level, but when I grew up at the primary school level, I was a shy person. I was sitting in a corner as if I can't speak to people. But somebody maybe pick up something else, especially teachers, that this person can be a speaker. And he pulled me out and then pushed me into the school debating committee or even team. That's when the 360 kicks in. It didn't come out immediately, it came out very slowly. Hence, issue of practice and practice and practice becomes very important.
Yeah. I think in many cases it's because we are not intentional about that. I mean, that's why many of us, we found out when our company started to send us to Toastmasters and those. And when you get to the Toastmasters and they put you there under pressure and then you talk promptly and what did they call it? Where you talk unprepared. George, you'll know that very well. And then they give you feedback. And then they start poking holes in you. And then you realize that, but it's just because you are not conscious of it. You're not aware of it. So you didn't work on those little things to make yourself perfect. So it just shows you that the level of consciousness and awareness is the beginning. And then exposing yourself to environments where people listen to you with the purpose of giving you feedback to improve yourself. Until you don't even think about it, especially if it's your job is to talk, until you just do it without thinking about it. But then if you forget, you can again drift back into practices and behaviors that are irritating to other people. And then you don't reach the maximum impact you want to reach. That's why I say it is a supplement, and we need to be intentional about
It exactly, yes. It
it.
is a
George
sign.
said, yeah, sorry, Zabula.
No, I said you are correct. It is a sign.
Yeah. And that's why bodies like Toastmasters are very, very helpful. If speaking is your business, George.
Yes, absolutely. Toastmasters is a great start, and it caters for everyone. If speaking just to get the confidence, or speaking to be able to communicate well in the workplace, and then speaking at a higher level, where you actually want to turn to be a professional speaker. But before I go, I just wanted to acknowledge my brother Devish there for his Project Management Institute certification, which is on LinkedIn.
Yes.
And to say, well done, my brother. Keep going. We say learning doesn't end.
Yeah. I saw it on LinkedIn. I liked it as well, Divesh. Congratulations. Thanks, George, for bringing that up.
There you go. Yeah, Sam, I think great speakers are always, or great communication, let me say, involves ability to be clear, clarity, and
Yes.
active listening, ability to listen. If there's a shortcoming majority of people have, is not so much the clarity. They can speak and be clear, but they can't listen. I've had to work a lot work on listening, because it's an art. Listening gets you really to be present, and gets the individual communicating with you to open up, because they sense that you are present with them. And that's from a coaching perspective. A good coach is a good listener, and he also listens with empathy, and is non-judgmental. I'm telling you my story, and therefore empathy is huge. And then understanding the background of the individual. So if you are communicating as a speaker, who is listening to you? And therefore, are you slow? Are you quick in the way you speak? I remember going to India, and we had a presentation. And I think 10 minutes into it, somebody says, "Slow down." And I had to slow down for the simple reason that I had an accent. The way I pronounce my words was the other guys couldn't understand. But when I slowed down, then I could I communicated well. And similarly, when they speak, now they have an accent to me. And when they go quick, I'm lost. And understanding those things, that who's listening to this presentation, is very, very important. Don't judge people, just understand who they are and help them understand what you are saying.
Mm, mm. That's one of the barriers there. Let's welcome Maynard before we go further in our conversations. Maynard, welcome. I saw you coming. How are you doing?
Thanks, Nadir Sam, and good evening, colleagues, and good evening to our listeners. Myself, I'm good. It was just one of those busy days, as usual, but nevertheless, no complaints.
Beautiful. Welcome. Following on George's point around the communication with people from different backgrounds, in this case, using the example of India, that let's talk about what could be some other barriers. I take that to be a language barrier, George, or it could also be the rate at which you talk becomes a barrier on its own, the pace of talking. And let's talk about this issue of language barriers. And I guess it goes beyond just being able to master somebody else's language, but it goes into many aspects of it. The pronunciation, the pace, and some people say that as Africans we talk very fast. I don't know, and we are not even aware because it's how we are. But I found it that every language that is not your language, you are going to find people to be talking very fast. Let's talk about that. And that's where diversity comes in. And what more about our listeners who we don't even know where they are, which part of the world they're sitting, but they're here with us as I speak.
Yes, language. Yeah, language barriers are probably one of the biggest barriers that we can experience. And when you say language, there, I mean, English is spoken across the world, but English is different English wherever you go.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you're in Accra, the English there and the English in Delhi and the English in Austin, Texas, they're all English.
Yeah.
All the three people would struggle to hear each other.
Yeah.
And so if you're trying to get a message across, you must communicate it in such a way, in a channel that ensures that all three people, the Accra fellow, the Austin, Texas fellow, the India fellow, all understand what you mean. And therefore, the importance of understanding your audience becomes huge.
Now, on a platform like this, how should one mitigate such regional dynamics? We're talking dialects here, right?
Yes. Well, I think for us here, and I'm guilty because I tend to talk very, very fast. I think that the thing is to try and slow down the speech, because unlike interactive communication, this is one way. I'm speaking, someone is listening. They don't have the opportunity to engage. And therefore, maybe using the simpler the language, the better. If I'm face to face with a group of people, I'm always checking for understanding. So I will speak and check whether that has landed. Sometimes I can just look into the eyes, I see it has landed, or I actually ask, has it landed? But on a podcast, that can't happen. And so it's on me to try and slow down.
Am I right to say that sometimes it's not even whether you you understand or you hear people well. It could also be your attitude towards that particular regional dialect that disturbs you from. Instead of focusing on the message, your attitude is such that you focusing on how you're irritated by somebody else's dialect.
Well, as a professional, that shouldn't happen. I mean, we look at us. Well, but if you're not a professional, yeah, but if you're as the grouping of us here as professionals, the level you are is you take yourself out of the way. Remember, I think I've said this before. Whenever you engage in business, the individual, the self, you take him out of the way. And you focus on that.
Are you saying that your attitude towards a certain dialect cannot be a barrier to your ability to engage fruitfully with somebody? Practically.
At a professional level, it shouldn't, sir.
It shouldn't, yeah.
It really should.
Good. I hear you. So you say that it depends. So because at the professional level, you have a much bigger purpose than just at an ordinary personal level, right?
Right, absolutely. You're in business, brother. You're not fun and games. This is business.
Yeah.
I suppose
the other barrier that follows immediately on that one, Divesh, is and we spoke about this last time, cultural barriers.
Yes, Sam. Just as well, before I touch on that, or really to mix that point with the one that George has been raising, we are fortunate in South Africa, and I will tell you why. Is that as much as we've got a problem with unemployment and the like, South Africa has always been a destination for your business processing, outsourcing opportunities from the rest of the world. That's your call centers, of which we are really focusing in on online streaming or communication for that matter. And in South Africa, we do have a large pool of educated and skilled professionals, as George was alluding. If you're in that environment, you do overcome some of the barriers that we are raising. Again, in South Africa, we are fortunate that we are in a multicultural society. We do have a high level of proficiency in English. And because of this cultural, in Afrikaans, they would say mengelmoes mixture, then you do evolve. It's an environment that you are in, and you evolve into being able to understand the different cultural dialects, being able to understand some of the nuances in terms of tonal use, in terms of specific words that you use. So we are fortunate that we can overcome some of those barriers. But because our show is targeted on a global audience, some of the challenges in terms of culture do come into play, in that again we got to understand when we are airing our shows, our podcasts are being listened to on a global basis, we must be cognizant of the words we use. We must be cognizant of things like or the behavior that we actually have. You can't have things like hate speech, which might be affecting a certain demographic somewhere else in the world. We got to be cognizant of that messaging, the communication that we have, which goes from the streamer, being us as the online show producers, to the viewers or the listeners out there. And then again, it's coming back, the viewer back to us. We got to get that feedback to learn from the do's and the don'ts that we are also trying to share with our listeners. It's a constant evolution. And thanks, George. I agree with the aspect of forever trying to educate yourself and forever trying to learn what's the new developments in the marketplace. Hence, I keep trying to do as many courses as possible, take that information and then share back into our communities. That as we also profess, is the style of leadership that we also find to deliver some value, Sam. So the cultural barriers, yes, we will find them, especially when we're looking at a global stage, and being able to get feedback from our audience is vitally important as a communication aspect as well, so that we can also learn to not make the same mistakes as we go along into our journey, Sam.
Mm, mm. It is absolutely very important to be conscious of that. And we can, and culture sometimes is also region specific. I mean, if you work in a global multinational organization with various locations across the world, all of a sudden now the difference in time and place becomes part of a barrier, become one of the barriers. And yet you may think that there's nothing to do with communication, but that becomes an issue because the barrier could come from the fact that you're trying to reach people at a time when it's not conducive for them to be fully present with you, George. And I think from coaching point of view, or if you have a client sitting in the Americas and you are this side, it's going to become very important if you want people to be fully present with you and pay attention to our messages, that you schedule the call at the time when it's appropriate for you and them. Or you have to go into negotiation about one of you having to compromise. You can't just assume that people are available to receive your message.
Absolutely. With time zones, in fact, actually yesterday, we had a little bit of a situation because the US has now implemented the 2 hour. So now there's the US the time that we were meeting at 5 p.m. And for them now it's 6 p.m. And I'm tuning here on my Zoom call at 5 p.m. yesterday and saying, but guys, where are you? And they say, oh no, for us now, it's and anyway, we ended up having to compromise. We will stay with 5 p.m. because now, because that's an hour earlier for them now. But talking of cultural difference, Sam, can I just share an experience? Because I worked in a multinational, and we were in Bogota, Colombia, and the issue around keeping time. In Africa we have what we call African time. So well out there they have a similar African time, but theirs is Latin American time. We simply miss if it's 8 p.m. then they show up at 9. And in our midst is people from Germany. And you and I know when a German man says it's 8 p.m., then it's 8 p.m.
Yeah.
And that communication created no end of misery and problems for people. Because at 8 p.m., the British guy and the Germans are standing on stage. Let's go. These guys haven't even left their hotel. Because,
Yeah.
And so it's understanding things like that. That how are we going to be communicating to ensure that we are on the same page? If I send you a message that says you be there at 8 p.m., I expect you to be there at 8 p.m. But if it is two Colombians communicating, say let's meet at 8, if you show up at 9, it's all good as well.
That is a serious barrier because that stops you from achieving that common objective. And yet you think you have communicated loud and clear and everybody understood.
Yes. Everybody understood because it's in black and white, it says 8 p.m. But what is 8 p.m.? Is 8 p.m. is anything around 8 and 9. Well,
so this makes the whole topic of communication much broader than we think. Because you are bringing the broader aspect of communication, George. It's not just me saying words and then you receiving it. It's the whole ecosystem of communication. because communication locates itself within a reason why you communicate, within a particular business objective or whatever objective. If you write a memo, if you send a memo or email, especially if you are a leader, everybody understand that this is coming from the leader. Is probably sending an instruction or sending in an announcement that we need to act on. That already changes the nature of communication. If you ignore it, you probably tomorrow not going to deliver expectations. Or if you read it and you don't take it with its seriousness, you have not received the seriousness of the message.
Yeah, so you're right, Sam. So when you communicate, understand what's in the gray there that needs to be brushed so that it becomes clear, black and white. What's in the gray?
The context. In fact, under the barriers, this is becoming quite very strong. They say often when people are at different levels, or even I don't want to bring the word status, but when people are operating from different levels and they don't acknowledge that, then they don't do enough to reach out to each other's level, and then miscommunication happens. It's a context, right?
Absolutely. It's a context and also the listener, what is he understanding from the communication?
I mean, for instance, we're using this platform. We are communicating it's a mass communication. It's not a one-on-one communication.
Right.
And communicating to the mass has caused its own dynamics. It's different to when you are communicating one-on-one or communicating to a team. And this is what, as Divesh was saying, that communicating on a platform like this is much more complex and more dynamic than any other thing. And that requires certain level of consciousness. And one of those, as you said also, George, was that be aware that other people are speaking a different kind of English based on the locality. And therefore, if you want to accommodate them, you may want to speak a little bit slow. But they're then cautioned to say if sometimes you're too slow, because there's a two extremes. Talking very fast, people don't hear you. It's like you are shouting instructions to them. You talk too slow, you can also lose the people because your energy is just too low. So you need to be able to bring it to moderation.
Yeah.
And then of course also now if you then want to be artistic, you need to be conscious of your tone, your tonation. You can't talk at one tone all the way. You're going to be boring. I hope I'm not doing that, but I'm just reflecting on how complex it is. And when you suppress your body language because people don't see you, they actually can hear it that it's not impactful. So how do you practice behind that, even if people don't see you? Because that's yeah. Let me hold it there and ask you to come, because I think it is for these platforms. I think that's where we are forever going to be students, and that's why we welcome feedback all the time. Rapula?
George and Sam, you're right. I was just keen to learn how does the French operate, because I know Umpil is the space in terms of cultural norms or cultural barriers. How do we overcome that, or how do you manage it? Let's take the professionalism out of the picture and say you are an ordinary man, ordinary person who is not in that business of speaking. How do you help that person to learn the cultural barriers in terms of understanding dynamics of each area? Hence, if you look back when you enter the corporate world, they'll say when you move from this area to another, somebody in the space of communication, or when you arrive in Colombo, this is how the Colombians articulate and how their gestures looks like, their body language looks like, so that don't feel offended or don't offend them. One of those little things you need to be sort of advised before you leave. The question arises now, How will you know? Or you just pack your bags and go without knowing? Not in a professional space, in non-professional space, so that your message could be conveyed and the receiver understand how you convey it, so that the receiver can give you feedback immediately as you convey the message. Those are the sort of dynamics of the communication. Keeps on evolving. It's not the same as it was before, but it keeps on evolving. Thank you.
Yeah. And you can add technology to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
It's a pity Umpile is on the public platform, so he's not going to be able to.
He's not going to
I mean,
comment.
with him, there he comes. Okay. With you, Umpile, it could even be the issue of not even, of learning the language. And then you, on top of that, you add the culture.
Okay, yes, thank you and greetings to everyone. And thank you, Rapula. I think I agree to everyone's comments in terms of most of the comments, especially with regards to the language, because when I'm here, and also in terms of like a lot of barriers, like we have mentioned, especially with language. It's different, I think, from that perspective of saying, here they speak French, because I'm in France, so they speak French, and most of the time you can see how communication can be hindered because of the language, and also in terms of what Ntate George said relating to the language, the English language, because currently I'm just knocking off, and it's almost like 6 to 7, and that side it's already, I think, to 8. So that's something that already was raised. And also where I work at the moment is there's a lot of people who speak English, and you find out that, for example, my colleague is like a Colombian. They speak Spanish, and the way they speak their English is totally different from how we speak, and sometimes we speak the same English, but because of the barriers we cannot hear each other, but maybe I have to repeat something. And also talking, I'm not sure if I'm answering Rapula correctly, but also, yes, in terms of that, and there's also the element of time, which also is very important. I think that the Divesh has done a project management course. So mostly if you do it for international context, you realize that there's a lot of difference between time zones. So I think also now I'm experiencing that type of barrier in terms of time zone, because sometimes I forget that South Africa and France, they have a maybe 1 hour difference depending on the seasons that we are in. But that's also something that can contribute to the communication. And also I like what Sam spoke about in terms of the context, maybe the levels of communication, because when you communicate with your manager and when you communicate with your colleague, it might be a different type of language or understanding. Maybe that's something I can add. And also in terms of technology, I've heard that with AI nowadays there's avatars when I can speak maybe Setswana, like my home language, and then that avatar will show me as I am and speak maybe French, English, or whatever, and you would not realize that maybe I don't even speak the language. So with technology, I think in the future we might have a possibility where everyone can speak their language, and then maybe a machine or AI technology will be able to do the work. So yeah, it's something maybe that's maybe being developed, is actually happening, but maybe in the future.
It is actually a huge addition to an ecosystem of communication, the technology. Thanks for bringing that. And that requires us also to adjust, because it is here. I mean, maybe in future, Kaiser Chiefs will not even need somebody to accompany the coach to interpret during the interview, because the machine will just plug the machine. And the guy will talk French, and then we will hear English this side. I mean, it's doable. I mean, think of it, George. I mean, he's being interviewed by a television journalist using technology. So that technology probably, and we are just receiving the output, right? So
Yeah,
that
it's
that
already
technology,
happening, actually. It's already happening.
yeah. Yeah, so that also creates opportunities because the language will not become a barrier in that case, because the technology will be there for you. But I think that this is really something we need to go on the lookout to.
Something I wanted to mention around barriers, and we can roll them into one. Well, emotional barriers and psychological barriers. You know, in the home, the one of the spouses is angry and is stressed. That can cloud the judgment and hinder communication.
Yeah.
But also things like fear, anxiety, and just a lack of confidence can actually hinder communication. And so, really, for good, effective communication in circumstances like that, I remember we did some emotional intelligence program, which you introduced them the other time. And that's huge, because just the ability to notice that this person is anxious, is fearful, and taking that into account as you communicate, that's absolutely huge. And what tends to happen is that a lot of people don't notice that. And therefore, when you communicate, you are expecting a response as if the person is, shall you say, in quotes, normal. They're not stressed, they're not anxious, etc., etc. And so, really, the point I raise is to say it's so vitally important as we communicate in the home or in the workplace to be on the lookout for signs of this. Whether, as I say, it's fear, it's anxiety, it's stress. There's a lot of stress going around right now. And so when you communicate with people, bear that in mind and look out for signs that show that there is some, these signs are available. These signs are there. And therefore deal with the communication that, as I said, I call them emotional or psychological barriers, but they are very, very important from a communication point of view.
And then most of which are expressed through our body language.
Yes. So fear the guy doesn't say, I'm fearful, but his body language will show you that there is something here.
Yeah. It could be very cold and somebody starting to sweat, and you ignore that.
And you ignore that, and you carry on as if all is well, you know.
In fact, just touch on the body language itself, because that is something that is also a matter of an awareness. Divesh, please feel free to come in there, because I think this I would want to hear your views, guys. The way that we are standing or sitting. I'm not the best in picking up the body language, but there are three categories that we can use to start learning, practicing our body language. So just look at the way people are standing and sitting if they are in your present, it's not on a virtual platform like this. And then the second category is the position of arms, legs, feet, and hands, and then of course the facial expressions. So and then again, that's also is influenced by culture, because I was told, I thought I was seated, relaxed with my arms folded, and I was feeling very comfortable. And I was told by this other person from another culture to say, you've closed up. And I was like, what do you mean? He says, folding arms is like you are guarded. So I don't know. And since then, I had never forgotten about it, because none of any person in my culture ever felt that when I'm folding my arms, I'm guarded. In other words, I'm protecting myself, and that's a sign of not being confident. And sometimes people say crossing your arms and your legs often indicates a closed mind. So, you can't leave culture out of that, if you go back to the points you made earlier on.
Yes, indeed, Sam. Culture does have a prolific influence in terms of your body language, even in terms of how you communicate. Certain cultures do use their hands more. I can tell you a lot of the Indian community as well, especially the ones in India, they use their head. They head kind of bobs a lot when they talk and they're
Mm,
trying to express themselves. And of course, when they become more emotional about something, there's even more vivid gestures made by their body parts, legs, hands, neck as well. But as much as that may be, again, it's an aspect of your upbringing, your environment, which you are used to, where, like you're saying, for you, having your hands folded was an element of being comfortable and you getting prepared to share your thoughts and your words with the audience that you engaged with. But somebody else in the audience has a different view in terms of that gesture. So you got to be
mm,
cognizant of that. But likewise, the person seeing you in that gesture has to also be cognizant of the fact that maybe they are wrong in assuming that you are blocked off and you are closed off because you having a different cultural slash environmental exposure. So it's not even a case of all Indians, all African people have certain gestures within the same cultural grouping. People will still behave differently and have specific gestures which they are accustomed to because of the environment, because of the global influences that they may have been exposed to as well, Sam.
mm. There you are, Abula. Before you go to Colombia, you better get a little bit of a crash course on
No, no, I will.
on some.
No,
Mm.
I will get some
Just
crash course.
to be a little bit closer, not to be surprised.
Are you off to Colombia?
No, not yet. I think George will take me to Bogota because he's got a citizenship of the mayor's first citizen's access. You see. So once he's in Bogota, things will be much more easier.
Let's do let's do a bit of a game, nice game here in the book interpretation of gestures, and let's see how close we are. Anyone can answer. I've got about 15 of them to quickly run through. Nodding of the head. What's the message?
Yeah, it's agreement, isn't it?
You're saying yes.
Agreement. You are in agreement.
Yeah. Or you
It's
are
So the
affirming.
agreement or understanding.
Or you are understanding. Or you are affirming. Dinesh?
Yes.
Well, I would assume that when you are vertically nodding your head, you in agreement, you following the train of thought that the speaker is sharing. You
Mhm.
also encouraging them to sort of
Ah,
continue
yeah.
with the idea that you're sharing. But like likewise, if you nodding, but in a horizontal manner, if you just to call that nodding, then of course you are disagreeing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, that is,
You have a different view. Yes,
that's
Sam.
Yeah.
shaking the head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay, we will say then that nodding is the positive affirmation, and then shaking the head would be the negative
Yeah.
affirmation.
Yeah. And I want to sit on that point of when somebody is busy presenting to you and you are a team, and you might be somebody that is highly regarded by that person. And normally you, if you want to motivate them, you know that they are wanting to receive your affirmation. So nodding of the head in many cases is to encourage a person that you are on the track, or I agree with you. You know, I see Rapula wanted to come in there.
No, I agree. I think the one area which was responded was sorry was the shaking of the head, which is don't agree. but
Yeah.
nodding vertically, you do agree. I wanted to come to the shaking of the head, but I concur with you. But
In
the
many
other one
cases,
is
yeah, Kero.
when the speaker is speaking and I'm not looking on eye to eye with them. Sorry, what am I? I'm not looking eye to eye with that person. May find that, sorry, it could be an offensive gesture. On the other hand, in certain culture, it's not an offensive gesture. So it's just to understand the dynamics around that.
So you are basically therefore saying it's not enough to know what the message is, but it's also important to know how to apply these gestures to achieve a particular outcome.
You are right, sir. Hey.
Because if you are not focusing on somebody that is talking to you, you are disapproving of that person, especially if it is in a public meeting.
So
And nothing of encouraging. So we are saying that because we are using we must master these gestures and their meaning so that we can actually enhance our communication, as George was saying earlier on. So it's not enough to know what they mean. It's also important to know how strategically to apply them for the benefit of enriching the communication. Obviously, not on a platform like this where you are in a public in front of people. In other words, they are tools of communication. Okay, moving ahead from side to side.
I said you are right, Sam. Just that my throat it looks like the water entered the earth passage, so that's why I was coughing a lot. I think you are right. Yo, I'm not dead.
Sorry about that. Drink some water. So we spoke nodding and shaking of the head. Now the third one is moving the head from side to side. Not shaking it, but moving it side to side. Can you get the difference? Shaking, you are like doing like this, and the side to side is like slowly to your right shoulder, slowly to your left shoulder. What are you saying?
This is the one I was referring to
Yes?
earlier, Sam, that you are negative in your perception of what's being said. You disagree.
You are doubting.
You also maybe when edging the speaker to not continue with that point any further.
In other cultures, though, Seb, the slow moving of the head left, right, might be actually a sign of sympathy. You feel sorrow. You feel for someone who is going through serious trauma, and you really like, oh my word, what can we do to help this guy? So in other cultures, that means that.
And here they're saying you say maybe, maybe is like not sure. Can you see that it can differ from one place to another? Shrugging shoulders. This is very common, even in our African cultures. We do that a lot. You talk to a child and then she shrugs the shoulders. What is it?
It's like whatever.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a where's your mom? And then she shrugged the shoulders.
I don't know, whatever.
And if you are a traditional man, George, you said, I'm talking to you. Why are you not talking back? The poor child is giving you an answer with shrugging of the shoulder. You just don't recognize her now. Is that common in the Botswana?
Sam is common. Umpile is just disappear. I don't know where he is now. It is common.
Yeah. Exactly. So shrugging the shoulders, saying, I don't know. Not sure or I don't know.
I think
now, as I said, the one I shared with you is that of folding arms or crossed arms. They say you are being defensive or you're closed up. Divesh?
Now, I just wanted to touch on the previous one, Sam, and to George's point. I think in this day and age, the youth especially, when they're shrugging their shoulders, it's not necessarily to say they don't know. It's more a case of I'm busy, so I'm not going to even think about what you're asking me. So it's
Yeah,
like, I don't
yeah,
kind of give a damn.
yeah. It's like I'm
They're not
Whatever.
present.
I'm the wrong person.
Whatever.
Yes, I was picking up on that point that George had raised. I also see it that it's not even the case that I don't know the answer to what you're asking me. It's more of a case that I'm shrugging the shoulders to get you off my back because I'm busy with something else. So again, it's a different dynamic with the different demographics that we deal with, Sam. The
Mm,
folding of arms, sometimes you could be comfortable, but in
mm,
large sense, it's usually a sign of you having a position of authority. So you
yeah.
are in charge, and
Uh-huh.
you're the head of the clan, the head of the household. Sam.
But you are exactly. But you are. That's the defensive. You say you can't touch me.
Yes, and often you would expect leaders to have that kind of control, to also invoke that sense of leadership to the rest
Mm,
of the people. But if you're in a group, maybe a panel discussion, some kind of a debate, or you're having an interview with someone, you may not necessarily want to come across as being very, very harsh or bold and not easy to be approached. So
mm,
that could be negative in that sense. But I also see that it could be a sense of leadership characteristic that you'd want to instill, especially in a meeting where
mm,
you might get elements in that meeting who don't respect the chair in that meeting,
mm,
so that element of like we always say, the Ubuntu mentality may not necessarily prevail in some of these gatherings that you do attend. So if you
mm,
have that stance to say, I'm in charge of this meeting and your hands are folded, maybe it does give across a element of
mm.
leadership and
Yeah.
boldness in that
Or you have
particular.
hands in your pocket.
Hands in the pocket is a little different, I would think. That is, you have something else that you're hiding. You're not necessarily someone you'd want to trust. Maybe you've got a gun in your pocket. So if you say the wrong word, I pull out the gun and end the conversation there and then. So,
Yeah. Shaking your index finger.
Yeah, that's. I totally disagree with you, my friend.
Finger wagging.
Yeah, I totally disagree. Be
You
careful,
angry.
man.
It's
You
more
are
like
angry.
fighting.
It's more threatening, isn't it?
Yeah. I'm angry.
Mm.
Watch it. Not in front of me.
yeah, it's a sense of
Right?
disagreement in terms of what was said or what was done. And usually you would expect that at a parent and child type of scenario.
Mm,
But even if in a relationship, maybe your partner has really gone overboard, and you start to wag the finger at them, and that, as George has said, it emphasizes a level of anger in terms of the spoken words or the gestures that was received, or even the actions that might have preceded that finger being wagged. But
mm,
often the person that you would wag your finger to also doesn't appreciate it.
mm, mm. The next one is very common and easy. Thumbs up.
All in
Well, thumbs up is thumbs up.
You're in agreements. Okay.
yes.
But
And thumbs down.
but the thumbs up as well as thumbs down in relevance to different cultural or environmental settings, you would understand that, especially here in South Africa, those could signal if you are hailing a taxi or a minibus taxi in particular, that could actually indicate where your destination is.
Okay.
Yeah,
And then it may not necessarily say, I'm okay. It's saying I want to go to Mamelodi or Centurion or Menden or something like that. So
yeah.
That's complicating things, David.
I thought that was a sign language of text industry. It was not the official language of communication.
But that's a language
and then definitely
Yeah.
in a
communication.
context, in a particular context.
Mm.
You know that other one of the railway station. You take your arm and move it, like wind it down like it's a train movie. So it's communication, but in that case, it's a particular context. Yeah, those one are very easy. But here's another one: pointing index finger at someone or something. Remember the first one was pointing it. What did we say? Shaking it, and now you are pointing at somebody.
Well, when we were growing up, Mom used to say, "You'd never point at anyone, my son.
Yeah.
If you want to speak to them, go and speak to them. Don't point a finger at them."
Yeah. Because
So,
that is a sign for blaming or for, it's almost like giving somebody a warning, something like that.
In a different context, you could point fingers just to get somebody's attention, especially if it's a crowd of people and it's a bit of a distance away, and someone might be looking towards you. And instead of you trying to walk towards them to talk, you would probably just get their attention by pointing at them so that they can stay at that point, and then you'd then approach them to deliver your message, or they would come towards you again. Normally you point and then you would wag your finger towards you to say, come towards me. So it won't necessarily mean something negative. It could just be in a sort of direction, a way of communicating, of course, to indicate to someone that I need your attention, and then you may show them other gestures to indicate to them,
Yeah.
whether they should move towards you or wait right there, I'm coming towards you, that kind of thing as well. So, but yes, I agree. Growing up myself as well, pointing figures, and even when they say don't point at the moon, even those were things that you grew up in terms of gestures. So.
Yeah. The thing is that there are some of us, we do these things without even being aware and not even meaning what we are, our bodies, our hands are meaning, or our bodies are meaning. But if you are in the midst of people from other cultures, you could be saying something and people could look at you very confused. I mean, the next one here, this universal one, I'm not going to mention it. Is again about the middle finger, but painting in that direction, I'm not going to mention. So that's vulgar. But handshake. What are we communicating when we shake a hand with somebody?
well, in a business sense, when you shake with somebody, it usually means, right, we got an agreement, my brother. Thank you. Shake hands.
Yeah, you are welcome.
The welcome, your confidence, you're showing confidence in them,
But it's also a very universal or common way of greeting people when you meet them for the first time, where you put the boundary. Last time we spoke about sometimes there are certain people that they can allow you into their inner boundaries, and those who you don't know, you're meeting for the first time, you need to stay on the borderline. And the handshake is an acceptable borderline of greeting somebody. You can't hug people when you're seeing them for the first time.
Yes, but let me tell you one funny one. About a month or two ago, there was this mpox all over the news, and someone came in from the UK and they'd been told, when you go to Africa with this mpox, don't shake anyone's hand. And so there I am trying to extend my hand. This guy is holding his hand back. And I'm like, and he says, oh no, Mpox.
Or during COVID, I mean, that was no.
There was a no-go area. So yeah.
Maybe let's ask Umpile. Umpile, when you arrived for the first time in Paris, how was your experience when it comes to handshaking?
Sam, it seems you have lost Umpile.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's
Yeah.
fine. Let's move on. Waving your hand at somebody.
It's more like a greeting.
Is hello.
Yeah.
It could be hello as well, Sam. Or if you've bit of a distance, you see someone, you can be getting their attention as well by waving. You could be in problems.
Or goodbye.
You want to get attention.
It could also be a goodbye.
Yeah, and in the case of George as well with the monkeypox, that's the greeting to say bye, don't come any closer.
Yeah, and waving both hands over your head. I think that's more of an attention device.
Yeah, that one is to say you're in trouble. You're trying to get somebody's attention.
Yeah, asking for help. In many cases, we do it in the factory, George, when they are far from somebody and your boss wants you to come over and sit somewhere and they want is ask for their attention, but in many cases, you know that they are going to call you over.
Right.
If they raise one hand, they may just need your attention, but they may not be wanting you to come over. But with two hands, once you receive their attention, you give them the attention, they are likely to then wave you, come over. And so people that don't want to come to you, they pretend that they are not seeing your waving. Anyway, so that was just an example and just to demonstrate how much body language is around us. The psychologists that called, I think I quoted it here, who did a research. What did they call him? He said he came up with some percentages. 55% of our conversation is through body language. And
Albert Meradier.
Yes.
It's
a famous study, apparently.
It is called the 73855 rule.
73855. Yeah.
73855 rule. But important point to note about it, it relates to communication of emotions.
Is it?
And applies where there is no congruence between the words I'm using and my body language. I think on this program, I gave an example of someone saying to you, "Oh, I am so happy I have been promoted." The words is, "I am so happy I've been promoted." But what you would expect is, "Oh, I'm so happy I've been promoted." But he's saying, "I am so happy I've been promoted." So there's no congruence between the words and the tone. And so when you are expressing an emotion, and if your spouse walks in through the door and they say, "I love you," clearly there's something there. You would expect, "Oh, honey." And yeah. And so when there's no congruence, so what Albert was saying was that in those situations, the non-verbal communication is paramount because that's 93% of the communication. Your words are just 7%. So if you're speaking to me about, hey, how you love me and all that, and it's your body isn't or your tone isn't in line with that, then I'm going to go with the nonverbal, which is
Yeah.
93%. But as I said again the other time, I said the CIA have now picked it up. They actually use it in hostage, whatever this was trying to say, when to get hostages and stuff. It's because I think generally you can extend it, although the research didn't get there. It's people now extending it to say 7%. People listen to 7%. The rest is nonverbal. I think it's a good guide. I would say to people, it's a good guide. So in a coaching conversation, and I'm talking to my client, and I'm noticing a big difference between what the words they're using and their body language. It just gets me to say, I'm noticing this.
Yeah. They said 7% is verbal, 38% is paraverbal, which is about how the tone and everything. And then 55% is the body language. I mean, that's a lot, 55%.
Yeah, listen, non-verbal is 93%. So clearly, when it comes to emotion, he's 100%. There's no way someone, when you are in an emotional state, your verbals are going to speak much louder than the words that you use.
And
So
can I also say something I mentioned?
We must never mislead ourselves, George, in thinking that people are getting our messages only through the words that they hear. There's much more we are revealing without us knowing, or maybe knowing it.
Oh yes. And this is why when you're speaking to in a coaching conversation, always be the one to be looking at much what is not said, because what is not said is very instructive, but the body language speaks. But as I said the other time, sometimes, for instance, I was in Eswatini, and this lady had helped us, and she wasn't looking at me, and she was looking on aside, and so for me, I understood that she was respecting me. But my colleagues who were with me, who are not from this part of the world, were saying, "Why was she not looking at you? Why was she? Is she hiding something?" And I'm saying, hang on, she's not hiding anything. Or because they grow up being told that you look sideways, you hand something to the man, you look sideways, and there's not. It's not. But this comes now to the body language, and somebody say, "Oh no, she's hiding something." And we must be careful with how we read this body language, etc. Because your understanding culture is important there as well.
Beautiful. Colleagues, I'm looking at time. This is very insightful, and I can see that you have never arrived. You keep on arriving in terms of learning to master the science of communication. I hope we have been able to highlight some of the things that we need to take note of in order to be able to represent our listeners very well as we are in conversation with each other and with our subject matter experts. But as we have always said, this applies in so many areas of our personal and professional lives. I think, George, I can attend a course on communication forever. It is just so relevant, and you always have something to learn. As Rapula was saying, this was really a learning opportunity. So let's check out and say goodbyes to our listeners, and also share with us what you're taking away from this conversation. Divesh?
Yes, Sam, to check out. For me, what's important is that the outcome of communication can have various effects both in your personal and professional lives. If you have effective communication, you could use it to build trust, prevent or resolve problems, provide clarity and direction to certain issues, create better relationships, and increase engagement with regards to your audience as well as the stakeholders that may be involved in your show, Sam. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks so much, Divesh.
Yeah. For me, is communication is such a powerful subject. And to our listeners, if there's an area you need to pay particular attention to, irrespective of what field of business you are or in your home, it is communication. And for me, uppermost is the ability to listen. I think the wars that we have in the world are really much down to communication breakdown. People are not understanding each other, and therefore might becomes right. Learn to communicate well, and to open in your communication. Listen to what the other person is saying before judging, before going full blown. That's huge. This is a powerful subject and cuts across governments, business, the home, your very own success. Work on your ability to communicate.
Indeed, indeed. Thanks, George, for touching on listening skills. I just jumped at that because we have had so many of previous units talking about active listening and fully present listening skills. It just shows you that these modules are intertwined and is a build-up. Yes, indeed. I guess it will be very difficult to communicate very well if you don't listen very well. And most of us are being challenged, and we can always work hard to become better. Thank you so much. Rabula?
I think my learnings or my take home today is learn more about barriers. Sometimes you may say you're a good communicator, only find that in the audience whom you're communicating with or the receiver, there is a hidden barrier. Learn as much as you could about barriers. It's going to make your communication much more easier. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much, colleagues. We lost Maynard and Umpile. I'm sure they are listening on the public platform. Yeah. So, wow, that was really good. I'm taking a lot from practical examples that you have shared with us, colleagues. But my awareness is that you can never be perfect enough. You just need to keep on working hard to get better. And I take your advice, George, that I think to be very good communicator, you must listen very well, especially your emphasis on the body language side, the 55% that Albert is talking about. It's a challenge to many of us. We ignore that and we communicate across, and sometimes I'm sure our partners in communication pick it up. They may not tell us that you are not listening and you are not seeing, you're not getting my message. So if we get better in that aspect, I think it will serve us very well in our relationships with others. And then, of course, from you, Divesh, thank you so much for highlighting those powerful outcomes of communication. You communicate because you want to achieve certain particular outcomes. And I think that's really my takeaway from you. And yeah, Rabula, your idea of being ready before you visit to other countries. It's a sensitization to say whether you are visiting for tourism purposes or for business. I think it's better to just prepare a little bit. You may not be perfect, but if you're trying, I think your hosts will appreciate. And that's why I wanted Umpile to share with us what has been his experience as he was settling down in France. overall, I think coaching happens communication happens in a particular context, cultural context, and sometimes even regional dynamics, time and places. So there's so much that we can become aware of in getting better. And for our platform, we try as hard as possible to understand our kind of listeners that we have, but we know it's a global platform, and therefore to be able to come across, you need to try to speak slow enough, but not too slow to bore the listeners. And but as Rapula was saying, the growing, yes, George?
No, sorry. I was just saying you might find out that they're asleep if you're
Yeah,
speaking.
absolutely. So as Rapula was saying, the increasing number of listeners means that we must be doing something right. Next week, we are moving on to unit number 37, conduct 32. And this is quite interesting. Again, it speaks to us as multitasking hosts and anchors or co-hosts of a show. It's titled Being in Control, exercising self-leadership. That's going to be the focus of next week. And again, it speaks to being aware of yourself and the environment. And we'll see what aspects of self-leadership that we need to cultivate. And again, once again, it could be in any situation. But in this situation where you are the central person hosting a show, it's very important to be in control of technology, in control of your agenda, in control of your messages that you are sending across, and making sure that you're connecting with your listeners and your guests, and you are fully prepared. What aspects of self-leadership do we have to look at? And I'm sure we'll talk about emotional intelligence there again. So yeah, thank you so much. That was unit number 36, conduct 31, communication strategies for the benefits of our audiences. Thanks, colleagues Divesh Motilal, Rapula Mudivani, George Mutenda Zamera, Ompile Lebile, and Maynard Maisela. And you, the listeners, as always, we appreciate your time and joining us on this weekly show. That was COMESA Radio Worldwide, the mind, the journey, the destiny. We apply our mind to the journey that takes us to our destiny. Our shows are based on the principle we call the idea. We inform and entertain, develop and educate, empower and support, associate and network. That's the idea. I hope we did live up to those elements of our principle and you enjoyed and learned from our conversation. Thank you so much. My name is Sam Tima. Goodbye. Until next week, Tuesday, same time, here at COMESA Radio Worldwide. And of course, as always, the podcast from this conversation will be available at insightsonlinepodcast.com, which you can access directly or here on Podbean, or you can also check it at Amazon Music, Audible, Apple Podcasts, Samsung Podcasts, and many others out there like Spotify. Goodbye.